The joke that makes The Naked Gun 2.5 The Smell of Fear really great is relatively subtle. In fact, as a child, watching this movie over and over again, it went right over my head. Only recently, after releasing the episode revisited dedicated to the original Naked Gun and discussing the sequels with a friend, I was clued in on why the sequel is actually so funny. You see, my friend told me that the whole point of the movie is that the bad guys, which are a conglomerate of nuclear, coal, and oil industry villains, want to prevent Richard Griffiths, Dr. Meinheimer, from presenting a speech to the president urging a change to the country's oil policy. The whole movie is about preventing this speech. Meinheimer is kidnapped and replaced by a double to stop it from happening. Our hero, Leslie Nielsen's Frank Drebin, has to save Meinheimer so he can present his speech, which he eventually does. But the best joke is the fact that when Meinheimer gives his speech, he's so boring and it's so dull that everyone listening to it, including the president, falls asleep and never actually hears it, making the whole plot totally meaningless. And that, my friends, is why The Naked Gun 2.5 The Smell of Fear is a gem.
You'll never get away with this, Habsburg. Whatever it is.
Granted, nothing comes close to the original, but it's well worth a revisit and actually holds up pretty well. The first movie was one of the biggest box office hits of 1988, making a follow-up obviously a no-brainer. While Zucker passed on making Airplane 2, they had no such qualms about bringing back Frank Drebin for another installment. However, Jerry Zucker's involvement would be limited, as he had become one of the hottest non-comedy directors in town. The previous year's Ghost was a blockbuster, so he was on board, but as an executive producer only. The same went for Jim Abrams, who did two milder-than-usual comedies, Big Business and Welcome Home, Roxy Carmichael, before making another comedy blockbuster of his own for the summer of 1991, Hot Shots, which came out just a month after this, and both movies were hits. David Zucker was the one that was left to direct this, with Pat Proft, his co-writer from the first film, helping him with the screenplay. While more scattershot than the first movie, it's still quite funny, even if it's arguably more dated than the first in its reliance on George Bush humor, with John Rourke nailing the impression. At the time, the energy debate was in full swing, with words like ozone layer making their way into the headlines, while ecological disasters such as the Exxon Valdez oil spill, which wound up being satirized in the film, were everywhere. Pretty much the whole cast returned for this, with O.J. Simpson's Nordberg getting an expanded role after his comic performance won raves in the first film. Again, Leslie Nielsen is in top form, playing a role that fits him perfectly. Around this time, Nielsen was fully embracing his new comedy stardom, showing up on talk shows in full Drebin mode, with his handy fart box never too far from his reach. I remember Nielsen popping up on pretty much all the big talk shows of the time, especially Donahue, to whom he sports an uncanny resemblance. Nielsen was so in love with the role that in some ways he played the part in all of his personal appearances until the day he died. Indeed, they even played Ira Newborn's theme from The Naked Gun at his funeral as he was laid to rest. It's kind of beautiful because I don't know that any actor has ever had more fun in a role than Nielsen had in these movies. This one sees Frank Drebin in Washington receiving a prestigious award from the president for most drug dealers killed. Inexplicably, his whole police squad unit is with him, and when someone tries to blow up a renewable energy depot, Drebin and his gang are called in to investigate. Of course, Priscilla Presley's Jane, who left Frank sometime after the first film, now lives and works in Washington, and works at the depot and is dating a smoothie named Quentin Habsburg, played by the famed Robert Goulet, several years before Will Ferrell memorably satirized him on Saturday Night Live. Frank, of course, is convinced that Habsburg is behind the whole scheme, and of course Frank, despite his incredible stupidity, is right. As in other movies, the admittedly thin plot is just an excuse for hijinks, most of which are pretty funny, including a great sequence set at the Blue Note Jazz Bar for the depressed. Priscilla Presley is once again the perfect foil for Nielsen and looks dynamite as a redhead, and their chemistry is spot on. Both George Kennedy and O.J. Simpson get more to do in this one, and they get in on the action with Drebin as he tries to foil the evil Big Energy Syndicate. The funniest bits in the movie included likely homage to the pottery scene in Ghost, which of course was made by one of the directors of the first film, Jerry. It features what will become one of my favorite running gags in the series, where anytime Drebin's body is shown in close-up, it's that of a hulking Schwarzenegger-style bodybuilder, a reference to a then-ongoing scandal where Hollywood actors were using body doubles. It climaxes, pun intended, with the greatest ever montage of phallic sequences ever put to film. I also love the faux ads for oil, coal, and nuclear power, with the two-tailed dog in the nuclear one always making me crack up. And while he's no Ricardo Montalban, who is, Robert Goulet seems to enjoy setting up his image as the movie's villain, making perhaps the first time a bad guy was ever named after the infamously inbred Austrian royal family. Richard Griffiths is also really funny in this, with his dual role as Dr. Meinheimer and his double Texan named Earl Hacker, and once again Weird Al Yankovic turns up in a cameo. The movie was a smash hit at the box office, with it outgrossing the first film and notably knocking Robin Hood Prince of Thieves from the top spot at the box office. It was the 10th biggest hit of the year and helped cement Leslie Nielsen's fame as the world's funniest senior citizen. It's not too hard to imagine that the series might have continued beyond the very successful third film had, co-star O.J. Simpson not become better known for, well, let's just say things other than comedy. But alas, that's a story for another time.